So this tonight is a master class, and of course, our master is master facilitator Jennifer Reddy. So Jen, we're just going to keep this really casual and really, conversational. And for a lot of you who follow me and are come to my groups, you know that I'm super informal. And so it's just a conversation amongst all of us. So you guys, pop in, raise your hand, put something in the chat, whatever you want to know about, or ask maybe Jen some specific questions that you might have about it or your situations. Please feel free. So, but Jen, I want to talk to you a little bit about, first of all, um, like your experience as a facilitator and you're a coach. And so kind of let's start off with that because, some people in the room might not know, like all the awesome qualities that you have and all the skill set that you have and some of the rooms that you do.
Yeah. So I've been coaching around a lot of topics. I kind of got into it actually as a sex educator back when I worked on college campuses. And then I transitioned into coaching around, interestingly enough, birth and death work, which I would not have thought how related those two things are. And I found that there was so much beautiful overlap in the conversations that I was having with people during these really profound moments in their lives, were so excitingly deep, like they were really, really profound conversations and questions that we were exploring together. But one of the things I noticed was that in those conversations, in those times of life, in those major transitions, that a lot of relationships would really begin to struggle. And so that's actually how I got into sort of the more specific relationship coaching, which of course, on circles often um, encompasses things like, divorce or grief or moving on, things like that. But we often don't realize, especially when we're in the throes of those things, how profound all of our relationships are to our well-being, both positive and negative. Um, and so, now I kind of play in all of it, and it's really fun. I love it. But here on Circles, most of my groups are divorce groups. And I do have a mindfulness group on, oh goodness, when is it? Shoot, I totally forgot. It's in the evening.
Oh, you know what? And I never remember the names of my groups either. I just say, oh, it's a NARC group or it's a trauma group. I
Right.
don't even know the titles.
So
Oh my
yeah,
God.
so that's what I do. And then I, have a private practice where I do a lot of coaching around a lot of things, but a lot of it's very relationship based.
That is awesome. So, what have you found to be kind of the common denominating factors in some of these? You're talking about relationships, birth, death. Is there a common denominator, or is it like communication, or what do you find in all of the years of experience that you have that's kind of, you know, similar um for the people that you talk to and that come to your rooms?
I mean, I think if we're going to look at fundamental human needs, right, we all have this very real need to be seen and need to love and need to be loved and need to see others. Um, and when that need is met, um, however it happens, what I find is that a lot of our other problems, it's not that they go away, right? I mean, if you can't pay the light bill, someone else really being able to sit with you, and that isn't going to change whether or not you can pay the light
Hmm.
bill.
Hmm.
But it does really change our experience of it. And what I found is that we humans, we talk about resiliency and we talk about, grit and we talk about all these other things, but there's only so much that we are designed to do by ourselves. And so being able to um, really work with people to be able to get back to that space, right? Because what we know is that, trauma and grief and things like that can do a really amazing job of shutting us down. so that we're
Mm-hmm.
not as connected to each other, so that we don't see others and we definitely don't feel comfortable being seen. And that affects our relationships in really powerful and fundamental ways, which makes everything else in life that much harder. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, from a common denominator standpoint, what I would say is we are all on some level, in some way, really struggling with that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yes, I'm sending the big hearts to that. You know, um, you just said something so poignant too about, I mean, yes, we all struggle, but I do think there is something to be said for a lot of us do have a hard time being seen.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of us, and I know there's a lot of people in this group that, have come to trauma groups, they go to your groups and relationship groups. And I think for a lot of us in those situations, we do hide. We want to kind of fade away. And you know, and then that causes loneliness, and then, and we have this desire to connect, but yet we pull away, and it creates this vicious cycle. I mean, I don't know. That just really struck me when you said that. This desire to kind of just not be seen.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I mean, do you find that happens in a lot for a lot of us, especially like the people that that you see and the people that come to the groups.
Well, I think, when we look at, like so many topics we talk about in our groups, right? Whether we're talking about boundaries or codependency or, like harmful, toxic relationships, things like that. So much of the foundation of that is this, this conflicting need, right? Of wanting
Hmm.
to be seen and accepted and loved for who we are, and not wanting to be rejected, not wanting to be abandoned, not wanting to be alone. But we also have that, smothering that is this cultural messaging that is so steeped in hyper independence and, this lone wolf idea, right? Which is
Hmm.
literally counter to everything we were designed to
Hmm.
be as a species. Those of you who are in my groups have heard me say this before, but, you know, um, we are designed to and created to be able to, co-regulate with one another, to support one
Yep.
another, to come together in community. And I joke all the time that we as a species are actually really pretty easy to kill, right? We don't have the biggest teeth or the longest claws or some cool shell on the outside of us. We're not super fast, right? I mean, all these things. um, and that one of the ways that we have made it to the point where there's 8 billion of us on the planet, um, is that we figured out really early on that if we work together in community, we are much, much stronger. And so from a biological perspective, we need each other. And so when we need to shut down in order to feel safe, when being seen feels terrifying, when the fear of being abandoned, is so strong that we're willing to sacrifice our sense of self around it,
Hmm.
then, it cuts us off from, again, this core needs, which, back to what I said earlier, makes everything in life harder because we're not actually designed like that.
Mm-mm. No, we're not. We are designed to be interdependent. And,
Yeah.
and the reality is, we are social beings, and nobody is self-made. Nobody,
No.
we don't exist in a silo. Even when we cut ourselves off from a lot of society, we still have to interact on some level to get some of our basic needs met. But, life is so much more than just about basic needs, right? It's about that emotional need and, our higher self and that self-actualization. um
Yeah.
you guys, Jen, I want to take a really quick break. Oh my God, we have such great turnout tonight. I want to welcome everybody in the group. This tonight is a master class, so you guys, just to give you some of a preview, so I'm going to be, fingers crossed, hosting this every Monday night. Jen is our first guest, and she is a master facilitator. She's a master coach. She does a lot of work with, shadow work is like her jam. And so I want to welcome, Jen. I know some of you are huge followers of hers. And I know some of you as well. And, we are all about, this is our big thing, Jen, and these groups. We're all about love and light and support and, positivity. So I just want to welcome you and thank you for spending this time with us tonight. So, can you tell us a little bit more though, Jen? You guys, this is going to be a little bit different format too for those of you who have never come to a master class. A lot of this is going to be, Jen is obviously the master at this. So she's going to really kind of delve into like what shadow work really is and some of the um, defining, qualities that create it and the awareness of it and holding judgments and just different aspects of that, Jen. And then you guys, I'd like her to explain some of that to us. And then if you guys have questions, pop your hand up, throw stuff in the chat. And I'm going back and forth right now between the chat and the audio. So, can you kind of give us a better understanding? A lot of us have heard of the term shadow work, but I think people don't really understand what it is and how powerful it really can be especially for people in a support group environment or, your own personal clients, which Jen sees you guys. So if you're ever interested in seeing her privately, definitely connect with her there too. Um, so I'm sorry, Jen. So go ahead, tell us.
Yeah, no,
I'm like I love that. I'm real chatty. So
I love it. I'm real chatty too, so we're gonna have a blast. So I mean, shadow work at its core, right, is this concept of everything we deny in ourselves, everything that is incompatible with our chosen conscious attitude about ourselves, for whatever reason, positive or negative, becomes part of our shadow, right? And our shadow is basically just that part of our psyche that we don't know about, right? So we can't consciously access it, right? So when we think about, you know, the things we share about in therapy or in groups or whatever, right? Those are things that are conscious to us. We know we are, feeling really sad all the time, or that we're having an anger issue, or that we just can't stop snapping at our partner or our kids, or, we can't stop crying, or those things we have consciousness around. We can think about them. Our shadow is the part of us that, and on some level, we decided was unacceptable. And so we kind of tucked it away. And well, a lot of shadow work really focuses on the negative aspects of ourselves. There are these pieces, that sometimes can be referred to as like the golden shadow or the light shadow. But they're positive traits in us, which again, for whatever reason, we we suppressed, right? And to the point that we don't know it exists. And here's
wow.
why I love this work, right? Is that we all have this, right? There is no way to be alive on the planet and not have a shadow. So the idea is not to
Hmm.
eradicate the shadow. The idea is to become as conscious of it as you can and integrate it and ideally accept it. It's just a multifaceted part of you. Um, so that it's not shadow anymore. Now it is a conscious piece of your personality. But
Jen,
when we, yeah,
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Finish
nope,
your
go
thought
for it.
because I had a question for that.
No, no, no. Let's go questions before I move
So
on.
when you say, the golden shadow or the light shadow, because, so many of us are taught or we only hear about, well, shadow work is the negative parts of you or the shame, right? Or
Hmm.
that anything that we want to deny or that we don't like about ourselves. But I've actually, very limited knowledge of, a golden shadow or a light shadow. And I think that could be really powerful for people to hear about.
So here's to me like a perfect example of it, right? Like, let's say you were born onto this planet and you are a creative, right? You're an artist. You're baby Beethoven or whatever, right? You can, play music because you heard it once or something like that. And you were born into a family of engineers, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and maybe during a time or a space or financial situation or whatever where there wasn't room for creativity. And in fact, all creativity was not only not encouraged, but actively discouraged.
Hmm.
Right. And so at a very, very young age, long before you really had the ability to put conscious thought and awareness to it, what you figured out was that this aspect of you wasn't acceptable. And so you tuck it away, right? Being baby Beethoven in a family of engineers at a time when the arts are being wildly shut down and
Hmm.
survival is on the line isn't really necessarily a helpful, air quotes everywhere, personality trait at that moment.
Hmm.
Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Again, this is a beautiful, amazing gift. But in that circumstance, in those scenarios, it may not be. Now, for some people, it wouldn't go into shadow, right? They would become the kids who rebel or secretly compose sonnets in their beds or are painting every chance they get or whatever. But for some people and some personalities, they would instead look at that and be like, no, I'm not going to focus on this. This doesn't exist. I'm instead going to become a math whiz or whatever. And so if that goes on long enough, right, and it happens early enough or with enough reinforcement, then there would never be even again a conscious awareness that there is this skill or there is this gift um, inside any of that. And so that would be an example of a light shadow, right? Is it's
Hmm.
not something dark and horrible. It's actually a beautiful, amazing thing, but it is still completely unknown to the person who contains it.
So are you saying then that it has the same effect, positive or negative trait, or something that, we're not, we don't want to shine a light on? Does it have the same consequence? Is the outcome the same?
I think probably not. I've never
Okay.
seen any work that did a side by side comparison. What we know though is that anytime there are too many parts of ourselves that we've repressed, they
Hmm.
do come out, right? And they come out in ways where, like I'm sure a lot of people in the world room can relate to this, right? You're in the middle of an argument or something, and you say or you do something that you never would otherwise, right? And you regret, and
Hmm.
you can't almost figure out like where that came from. There's that feeling of like, I didn't even mean it. How could I have said or
Hmm.
done it? That's your shadow coming out. Um, or sometimes if you have that moment where people keep asking you what's wrong, and you really mean it when you say like, no, everything's fine, but to that your face is not reflecting everything's fine. Your face is reflecting that you are in great anger or despair or something like that, right? That's your shadow coming out. um and a lot of times how we see it in tangible ways in our lives is that we're creating things in our lives that we don't consciously want, right? So we're saying, I want a relationship, or I want a better job, or I want to figure out inner peace, or whatever it is we're saying we want in that moment. Um, but everything that we are creating in our life is the opposite of that, right? So we're creating being single, or we're creating fights with people,
Hmm.
or we're creating um, stress and chaos. And so a lot of times a lot of shadow work is sort of the act of looking at what's actually showing up in your life and then backtracking from there.
Okay. So, but do you have this what is your thought on, we have to have an awareness before we can change behavior, and so many people in this room hear me say that.
Hmm.
How do we become aware of these behaviors or these parts of ourselves that we are denying, or certain behaviors, when they become tangible, that we weren't aware of, that we don't know where they came from. Like you said, why did I say that? I didn't even mean that. How do we increase our awareness of this?
So my favorite exercise to start shadow work is to write down all of the things that you judge in other people. Everything, whether it is driving, whether it is clothing, whether it is attitudes around money or love or whatever, everything that you judge, and especially the really strong things, right? And we're ramping up into an election year, so there's going to be a lot of judgments on all sides coming up, right? So
Hmm.
really writing down what those things are that you judge in other humans as negative, bad, incompatible, not okay, whatever. Um, and then from that space, sort of backtracking what it is about that thing that you find so intolerable. And the reason that's one of my favorite examples is because, there's this concept in shadow work that is that, anything that you see, anything that you react to, anything that exists in your world has to be contained in you in some way, shape, or form, right? It doesn't mean it is a part of the personality that you exhibit. It doesn't mean it is something that you want to exhibit, but somewhere in there it exists. Otherwise, it wouldn't show up for you, or it wouldn't bother you, right? It's maybe a better way to say that, right? You wouldn't
Mhm.
have this large emotional charge if it wasn't something that you contained.
Okay.
And so looking at the judgment and then looking what is underneath the judgment, right? So an example of one that I think is like, okay, so for me, I always judge those people on the news who, something happened on their block or whatever, right? And there's a news camera out, and you think back about it, right? And whatever happened like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours ago. It didn't just happen. I mean, the news crews are there, right? So it's been going on for a minute. And they've probably been standing around outside for a minute, whatever. And then they go on national live TV, and they're like in their rollers and their house coats and whatever. The teeth aren't in, like all the things. And I always look at those people and I think, what were you thinking? You had time to at least put on pants, right? And you didn't. That was a choice. You chose to let the entire world see you. And
That's
now that there's social
hilarious.
media, right? Like forever without, you're in your house coat or whatever. And so you take those things and you look at them and you look at like, okay, so what's under that for me? Why does it bother me that other humans would do that, right? I'm not doing it. I'm not talking to news
Right.
crews. Like that's not me. So why does it bother me? And then it's like really like looking at what is under it. And it's like, okay, so do I do that? Maybe not directly, but in other ways, do I show up? Do I leave the house in my mismatched clothes? Do I, um, or was I raised with this belief system, right? That you have to always look your best. It has to be perfect, right? I mean, I remember my grandmother was always like, you never leave the house and like, without like socks or underwear with holes in it or whatever, because, God
Mhm.
forbid you were in an accident and they had to cut off your clothes. And I remember being even a kid and thinking like, that is the least of my worries in that moment, but okay, Um, or is it more about, the mask that we're supposed to present to the world? And does it bother me that there's these people who are so comfortable in their skin that they would walk around
Yes,
maskless? And so there's
absolutely.
not an answer, right? It's not like we can look at, all
Mhm.
of us could have that same judgment about this person on the news, and all of us, it would be coming from a different space. But it
That's
starts
true.
with noticing the judgments and then backtracking into your own psyche about, okay,
Well, and
where is
being
that coming
honest.
from? Yeah.
And being honest, because it's hard sometimes for us to be honest, especially when it's a trait or a behavior pattern or something, a
Hmm.
characteristic that we've assigned to ourselves, and that we have shame around. And so I think sometimes that's where the real challenge is for a lot of people is, being honest to the point of being able to unmask the shame
Yeah.
to say, okay, this is really because some of this stuff is deep, right? So, I think that that can be where, if people understand, you guys, we are only accountable to ourselves. And, and when we give ourselves permission to just be accountable to us and that there's nobody else watching or nobody else, around and it only matters to us. We are our own judge, jury, and executioner. And,
Yes.
we're the hardest critics. And if we can get around that and give ourselves grace, man, it can just blow open the doors of healing.
Yes.
So, I'm going to take a quick break here. Dee, I
Yeah.
see you. And I know Laura had asked, and I don't know if this is something, Jennifer, that you can put in the chat or if any of the rest of you have thoughts or links or resources, but Laura had asked, what's a good book to get started on shadow work?
Ooh, that is a great question. Okay, so my favorite shadow workbook that I've ever come across yet is a book called Existential Kink by a woman named Carolyn Elliott. And it's available everywhere. It's an audiobook, it's a printed book, it's, whatever. You can find it everywhere. To me, that
Existential, what is it?
it's Existential Kink, Kink.
Kink. Okay, Kink. Okay, okay.
Um, and the reason I like it is because her examples are really tangible and I think relatable to most people, right? I mean, she talks about money, she talks about love, she talks about relationships, she talks about her, struggles to succeed in work. She talks about these very real tangible examples of the ways in which shadow work affects us. And so I think, a lot of shadow work books are very theoretical. They're great reading. Um, but they're not necessarily like tangible, applicable,
Mhm.
feet on the ground kind of stuff. And I think
Right,
her
practical.
book is a really great one for that.
Well, and I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. This stuff, this philosophical stuff is great, but when we're hurting and we have, real needs that need to be met, we want something that is doable, that we can actually like look at it, think about it, relate to it, and work through it on like practical levels. I think for a lot of people, it's some of this I don't know how else to say it, like this high level reading. It's really lovely and theoretical, but it is so it just seems so out there that we can't necessarily relate to it on a human level.
Yeah.
Um, and then Laura had also asked, do you recommend the workbook too?
I have not seen, I've seen, okay, there are so many shadow book workbooks out there. And I will say most of the ones that I have seen, well, okay, all of the ones that I've seen so far, I feel like are great if you are a workbook person. If journaling to specific prompts on pretty paper or whatever is your thing, which I mean, God knows I am a sucker for all of those things, even though they just take up space on my shelf. But if you're one of those people who actually write in it or something, then like I think they can be helpful. I have not yet seen one that I would, say is anything special or magical or amazing. That doesn't mean there's not one out there. There's just I haven't seen one that is
Hmm.
great for that. And
Hmm.
I am not aware if there is an existential kink specific workbook by Carolyn Elliott. I have not seen it. That doesn't mean it hasn't existed since I last checked it out, but I haven't seen that. So I don't know. I do know there's a
Okay.
thing on Amazon right now where lots of people will sort of say this is the existential kink workbook, but like they self-publish it. Some of those can be amazing resources. Some of them are horrible. So unfortunately, there's not one that I've seen that I can recommend. But if Carolyn Elliott made a workbook based on her other body of work, I would say it's probably amazing.
That's awesome. Okay, well that's good to know, and that's fair. That's a fair judgment. I have bought several workbooks for different things, different types of, therapies and, healing practices, and some of them have been really helpful, and a lot of them are just like you said, they're collecting dust. They look nice on my bookshelf. Makes it look like I'm really well read, you guys, but some of
Right.
them are so bad, like a third grader could have done it. Okay, so just a couple of other quick comments, and then Dee, I'm going to get to you, and Jeannie, you too, and then Calvin. Yay! I'm so glad that you decided to join tonight as well. Calvin has some questions too. Um, but first, I want to acknowledge Kelly. Kelly is someone who comes to my groups, and Kelly, he was saying earlier, he's been so closed off for such a long time. He doesn't know how to be around people and carry on conversations, but he's really putting himself out there. And it's been confusing experience, and that can be so true for a lot of us. But
Hmm.
I just want to acknowledge you and validate you, Kelly. I feel like you're making progress, and the fact that you share, and the fact that you even have vocalized some of your thoughts and feelings, and I just want to know that you are seen, and I feel and see you, really stepping out of your comfort zone. And I really want to give you lots of, credit for that. You know how I am, you guys, about the big hugs and, lots of love. So we're giving you lots of that, Kelly, because I see like the tremendous growth. So, keep going. You're doing this. Um, And so let's get to Dee. You've had your hand up for a long time, and then Jeannie, and then we can address what Calvin put because he had a really great question.
Yeah.
Because I think that's at the heart. I don't know if you saw it, but I think it's at the heart of it because that's the scaredy cat in us about doing
Mhm.
that deep dive. So go ahead, Dee.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, how does shadow work relate to, like, when you're tapping into like your inner child and things like that? Was one of the things I was going to ask. And then because I found here recently, like I've done trauma work in the past, and then I'm kind of going back into trauma work now because of situations that I'm dealing with. But I'm doing it with a different approach and a new therapeutic, also with Reiki. And so part of, I do kind of like a deep, like trauma energy block where I'm actually like, going deep into these. And I, the fear is so significant when you're touching or tapping into like the that subconscious mind because you just don't know. And Mike, for me, I don't know what could potentially pop up. I've had in previous trauma work that I've done 15 years ago, like a portion of a house that I completely forgot that existed before it was redone, had come to me like
Mm,
from my
yeah.
childhood. So um, I was just curious because I've heard shadow work before, but I've never really explored it. And just wanted to understand kind of like what's the association, or is there association to like your inner child and that depth of dealing with the fear, and because the subconscious fear is so intense, like even if I'm aware of it, I know it's even deeper than what I can even visualize just
Yeah.
based on the work that I've done. So
No, that's a
thanks.
great question. And and it often sort of plays with parts work in the same way. And so, it's kind of one of those things where in psychology there's all these different schools of thought, right? And every school of thought gets its own language and its own format, and it can be really, really helpful. And I love it. I honestly love studying all the schools of thought. And there's sort of this problem, right, where we don't have everyone in the same room speaking the same language at the same time all of the time. So is shadow work different from inner child work? Yes. When we look at inner child work, we're often looking specifically at the small wounded parts of ourselves. Um, or sometimes the parts of ourselves that we don't express anymore because of the wounds that sort of came in and covered up our child. Um, and so a lot of that work is sort of about both learning to reparent ourselves, learning to take care of ourselves, learning to heal those wounds, and learning to express that childlike wonder and joy that we contain always. And shadow work is not really about that as much as it's about um, looking for the parts of ourselves that we've repressed, right? Which now, obviously, of course, you take those two things together, and there's going to be a lot of overlap, right? The more shadow work we do, the more able we are to express our joy, the more able we are to fully love and accept ourselves, the more able we are to fully love and accept other people. So there is overlap in certain places, but sort of the directions they're coming at it from are different. And I kind of look at it, and there's probably people in this room who will disagree with me, which is totally fine. Um, as like all of these things are frameworks for understanding the psyche, and the psyche is not like a clearly defined box or encyclopedia or something, right? Where we can put everything in nice, neat categories. Our psyches are these crazy, weird, beautiful, amazing spaces that we reside in, and we everything else that we're coming up with to describe them or to work with them or to figure out who we are and how we are is just giving us a framework to do that in, right? So I think there's going to always be overlap between different schools of thought and different languages around this, and I think there's going to be spaces where there are distinct differences. Kind of like if we look at literal languages on the planet, or religions or things like that, right? There's places where, Episcopalians are different than Protestants, which are different than Baptists, but do they all have some really similar core belief systems? Yes. Um, all the Latin languages, same things, right? They're very, very different, but there are these like underlying themes. And so I think that's what we find when we are looking at like IFS versus inner child versus, shadow work or things like that, or anything else that tries to put a framework around our us, right? Is that, it gives us something to work with, but no one methodology is the end all be all. And they're all going to overlap and touch. Did that kind of help answer your question, Dee?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was just like when you were talking about, things that we suppress, because, in survival mode as a child, if you go through trauma, there are times when you do suppress the good and the bad parts of you to survive the situation. And
Yes.
so I know, like, going through different parts of my journey and like recovery from a lot of things, there's been different pieces where, they tap and they say, okay, you really like music, but how come you never play it? We should try that. We should explore those things. So it's just trying to understand, like, how do you exercise that modality in the moment to get the benefit? I guess to me, it doesn't really matter what the label is, but just for understanding like the practice or the work that you're doing, and what outcome you're seeking when you're doing it, I guess is somewhat helpful too. So.
Okay. So let me expand a little bit, and thank you for clarifying. So most times, right, and I don't want to say all, but most times when we're doing inner child work, it is very in the moment, right? We're trying to, soothe ourselves in this moment. We're trying to, bring back certain things. We're trying to look at certain things. We're trying to reparent certain parts. When we are doing shadow work, it's a little less feeling and a little more head, right? So there's a little more logic to it, a little more conscious deep dive through the psyche, as opposed to a sort of more intuitive feeling aspect to the psyche. Now, I say that, and I also want to be really clear, shadow work is very, very, very like gut feeling centered. Because when we're wandering through our stuff, right? That's how we know, back to the example I gave earlier, about my judgment about people on live TV in their house coats. And I gave like 3 or 4 different reasons why that judgment could exist. And it's only through really our own gut check and our own resonance that we can kind of figure out when we're close and when we're not. But it is a little different in that we're not usually, I don't know of a way to engage in shadow work in a way that's sort of like an in the moment, soothing, helpful conversation. It tends to be a little separate, and then we tend to bring it into our psyches through acceptance and integration. Did that help at all?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for that question. It was great.
So, Jennifer, this what you touched on, with the also really touches on a little bit about what Calvin asked too about, you know, how do we get started into the the people or the guidance he actually asked who are hesitant, to get started on it. I think we're afraid of what we're gonna find.
And I think that's really valid. And, it is really common, especially in shadow work, because we are, intentionally going looking for the parts of ourselves we don't know. That there's usually a disclaimer at the beginning of every book or at the beginning of every class or whatever that says some version of, if you're currently in the midst of huge grief, if you're currently in the midst of major depression, things like that, it might not be the best time to start this work. Because there's enough other stuff going on. And I think that is true to a certain extent, right? And what I mean by that is I've worked with people with this work, who are going through those things, and they've been able to navigate it seamlessly. But I think it's also about knowing how far we are able to dive. So if you know that right now you are in the middle of huge, heartbreaking grief around a particular situation, I would be the first one to tell you that is not the thing to start your shadow work on. That is the thing to continue grieving on. All right, let's start your work on something else, something a little lighter, something a little smaller, something a little easier. People typically tend to want to do this work and dive into the biggest, hardest part first. And while I too am definitely that person, I will also say
That's
that,
hilarious.
oh, I'm so that person. I'm like, oh, there's
Oh,
the
me too.
hardest way possible to
Yep.
do
Yep.
something.
I go,
Yes.
uh-huh.
Yeah. Give me the
I go
PhD
from
level
0 to
program for
90.
that. That's what I want.
Yep.
But I think there is value in learning to be gentle with ourselves and our capacity in that moment. And this work does not have to be the take all of your biggest, darkest, scariest demons and start examining them. It can be literally, why am I getting so angry on the road in traffic? Why is this making me so crazy? Why do I have such a charge around flat earthers? Why? It can be something that is not quite so like childhood trauma focused or so death of a parent or a child focused, or we can start with the much lighter parts of our psyches. And then when we feel ready, we can move into the bigger things.
Mm, that helps a lot because basically it's baby steps. We're
Yeah.
baby stepping it. Yeah.
Yes.
Because I tend to be that same person too. And I don't know if the rest of you are like Jennifer and I, but I want to go for the most complicated, deep, like let's get right to the heart of all my problems from when I was little.
Yes.
Or, like why was I on Husky Success? Let's go right to the point of my, where that all started from when I was a child, and it usually like that's where I want to go.
Yeah.
Or why it just that. And and then you get in the middle of the weeds and you get into these complicated situations like, oh snap, this
Hmm.
is really deep. And maybe I wasn't ready for that, but my probably my pride and my stupidity won't won't let me back down. So yeah, I mean, and that can be really detrimental. So
It
again, it's
can.
that self-awareness and acceptance of self. And I think sometimes you guys, a lot of us who are, and there's a lot of guys in this room tonight too. Which I'm sorry, we're all facilitators, the end all be all. It's the same. We're all doing the same thing. But a lot of us, we just, like, oh, I can handle this,
Hmm.
and so I think that, it's sometimes we have a harder time with self-acceptance and giving ourselves grace. Um,
Yeah.
and as empathic people, I think in general, we can give everybody else grace, but we don't want to give it to ourselves.
Definitely. 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 And what I would say is, I think there's always a tipping point balance between pushing ourselves in growth, knowing that growing is pretty much never going to be comfortable, right? Like we're
Mhm.
always, it by virtue of the definition of it, we're treading into uncharted territory. We're going to be squeamish. We're going to be uncomfortable.
Yep.
And, you know, masochism, right? Which
Oh yeah, we love that.
we love
Well, there's
that.
comfort. There's comfort in trauma.
There
There's comfort
is.
in trauma. And even though, because I tell my group members, a lot of you in here have heard this. I don't know, what your take on this is, but the devil that we know is easier to deal with than the devil we don't know.
It is.
So and trauma is familiar to a lot of us. And so it's like, oh, I know how to deal with this. It's going to be dysfunctional. I'm going to have an up and down. You're going to scream at me. I'm going to, pull away. I'm going to be able to, and we know this game.
Yeah.
And so it's easier. And so there's comfort in that. And I think sometimes though, the two, that's where the healing starts, but it's like taking a toy away from a child. It's like, no, 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 that's my security blanket too. And when we have to rip that off, wow,
Yeah.
that can be really, really scary and really, really painful. I have a question, and it kind of goes along with what Jeannie put in the chat about Jeannie's really big into, I know, breath work and what was the other thing we talked about the other day? We talked about it yesterday, Jeannie. Oh yeah, breathing and meditation. But
Hmm.
so, what kind of, when you talk about shadow work, I mean, is it talk therapy? Is it hypnosis? Can it be a variety? Can it be meditation? Can it be breath work? Can it be a combination? Can it be Reiki? I mean, what does that look like? Like, what can you kind of, because, trying to get a visual, are people laying down? They got their eyes closed? Are they talking this out? Like, if they were to come to you as a coach, what would that look like?
So on a really tangible level, I mean, the way I like leading, I mean, I actually teach shadow work classes, and it's a combination of shame and shadow work. And the reason why is because the two are so linked. That it's, even though they are very different things, they hold hands. It's sort of a combination, right, of individual work, right, work that we have to spend time deep diving into our own psyches and um really diving under the thing, right, and then under that thing, and then under that thing, which is why there's so many shadow work journals, right? It's a lot of it we find can be done through our journaling prompts. It's a really great way to open some of those doors. But the reason I lead classes is that, our small groups, is because there's also so much when we talk about acceptance, when we look at some of these things, the epiphanies and the ahas of hearing other people as they're processing their stuff, can be so wildly helpful. Because a lot of times, if we haven't heard a concept before, this is why I love groups in general, or heard something said in a way that was accepted, or something articulated a certain way, we don't have context for it. And, I really believe fundamentally we humans are incredibly contextual beings. We want to contextualize everything. And so when we can't do that, it does sometimes get us a little stuck. And so in groups, when we both have the opportunity to really genuinely accept and love each other and whatever is coming up for people, which in itself is sometimes really challenging. I mean, I've led groups where it's like shadow amongst shadow upon shadow being triggered by each other, which is very hard, but also really beautiful, transformative work. But the acceptance that can come in there of like, hey, I just, talked about some of the things that I didn't know about myself and I'm having a really hard time accepting. And then we share it with others, having it be lovingly held, and having that moment, right, where the other heads are nodding with that like me too thing, can really help speed our acceptance of our own stuff.
That's huge.
So yeah, it doesn't tend to be breath work. I mean, it can be. I highly recommend mindfulness. Well, okay, I recommend mindfulness for everything, because I have not yet seen an instance where mindfulness is not a useful tool. But especially in the case of shadow work, where we are literally trying to notice our own behaviors, our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own stuff that is, again, unconscious to us. So we're looking for it in other ways. Mindfulness can be a really great way to become more conscious of those things so that we then can start to excavate them.
Beautiful. I love that. So can you go into you had mentioned something to me offline about journal prompts. Can
Yes.
you go explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. And I really quickly want to go back to Jeannie, because I saw her hand go up and then
Yes.
down and then up again. And Jeannie, I'm wondering, did I
Yep.
answer your question entirely, or did you have more?
Well, I wanted to do a quick snap. First of all, when I think of shadow work, it makes me think of a Cat Stevens song. I'm being
Mm-hmm.
followed by moon shadow. Some of you older people might know who I'm
Yep.
talking about. And that's quite relatable, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wanted to touch about the loneliness and things I had put in the chat too, that, sometimes you feel so alone. And um, I had gone to, Dr. Cheval.
I do not.
She's an international therapist that does work on, the subconscious and being real. And anyways, she had a worldwide event workshop, and I was at that in Atlanta about a month ago. And I found that quite interesting. And I think there's a real movement going on in our society right now where, we thought that the computers and technology would bring us closer together, and they've really disconnected us even more. But what I wanted to touch about was about the loneliness, and I feel, and yet the yearn for wanting to be around people. And my feeling is, and my experience is that, a lot of there are people who are very empathic,
Mm-hmm.
really um, want to help and do their gifts and sharing. But it's also very lonely,
It is.
because of because you have to learn how to shield yourself also.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually watching something today with Aaron Doherty. He does the whole thing. He had something on YouTube. It was from a couple years ago about, how important it is. And I totally relate to this. I'm sure some of you do too. If you're extremely empathetic, it is a blessing and a curse. And so, how do you take that to get that balance and keep your feet grounded? And I think that is something that our whole, especially empathic people, but also in general, society is trying to figure out, how can we keep grounded, and how can we stay connected when we're being overrun by all this technology and chaos, and keep the center. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think that's something that's really important to be able, if you're an empathic person, is to learn how you can give your gift and share it, and not let it damage you, and not be so isolated.
And I'm
Thank
going to
you,
say,
Jamie.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. That is not, I mean, look, shadow work can be done on everything. And that is not really the, that's not what it's meant to sort of look at, or
Yeah,
to do or handle. And again, I don't want to say that it can't be looked at, because I would say, like, in some of the belief systems of, like even what you said, right, that this has to be, or that this is by its very nature like a lonely, isolating thing, I would say, like, okay, like that's something that sounds like it has a little bit of a charge for you. That might actually be a great place to do some shadow work around.
exactly.
um but as a modality, it's not, it is not directly about becoming more grounded. It indirectly does succeed in that, right? In that the more we can know ourselves, the more we are full, you know, in full human beings,
Mhm.
with lots of um, nuance and facets and acceptance of both our proclivities and other people's proclivities. Like, I think it makes it much easier for us to stay grounded in a large number of situations, because it makes us more steady in who we are, because now we know who we are. We are less buffeted by the wind. But it's not an official grounding technique, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Jamie,
Anna,
for
go for
No,
it.
asking.
thank you. I
No,
just
you're
wanted to
okay.
give it to. I just wanted to give it a
Yep.
snap on that. That's all.
Thank you
Oh,
so much, Jamie. Go
yeah.
ahead, Jen.
Oh no, that was it. I just thought I
Oh,
was done.
oh,
Yeah.
no, you're okay. We just only have a couple minutes left, and there was a really good question that came up, and I also want to have time, Jen, for you to be able to, give your contact information, both on circles, and then, even I know you do private practice, and so, absolutely, it's time to shine, or social media, anything that you even want to put in the chat. But Alex had asked, can we have a quick example of shadow work and how it is done? Like,
Yeah,
and I don't know
totally.
if perfect. Okay. So
And
we're
that's
gonna have to, and yeah, we're gonna have to end with that question. We only got 3 minutes left, and you guys, I know I want to respect everybody's time. And definitely, what a great turnout, you guys. You guys are awesome. So, go ahead, Jen.
Um, so okay, so to me, I mean, again, I always love starting with the judgment exercise, right? And that is shadow work, right? It's figuring out what your judgments are and then diving into it. You know, what about that are you judging? Why are you judging it? What in there bothers you? Where is the resonance in there? And really, really, really looking at that. Um, Another one that I typically do at the beginning of my groups on this stuff is think of the things that you would be absolutely horrified if everyone else in this room right now were to find out about you, right? Absolutely just horrified. Those things, look at them, you know, and it's not the thing itself, right? It's not about whether or not you know, stole candy. It's not about whether or not you cheated. It's not about whether or not you lied. It's not about any of those things. It's about what belief is under that about who you are or what it means about you or how you judge other people for doing it or whatever, right? That is sort of where it's like an arrow, right? We can't ever directly do shadow work. What we can do is sort of follow the little neon arrows. And so that's another neon arrow that you can follow down. But there is also, you know, journaling stuff. You know, Anna brought it up a second ago. And I think that there are, you know, I always look at it as like, okay, so, you know, do some journal prompts and then put it down for a week and then come back and do some more, you know, like go to the next level, right? Like one of my favorite ones is in what ways are you inauthentic and why? You know, and, you know, the multiple layers that we could, you know, really look at that the ways in which we can continually come back to that question and find another level of how we show up inauthentically and why we do it. Again, is not in and of itself a direct shadow, but it is and it's an indirect pointer, if that makes sense. And I will say in existential kink, there are some great exercises. You know, not everything is ever going to resonate with everyone, but I would say, you know, even picking and choosing through that book, through the things you love the most, are great places to start. Or, you know, again, I have classes, come hit me up. There's other people who do shadow work classes. You know, join one. The only thing I would say personally is if it's a deep dive class where you're going to be doing a lot of like really wandering through your psyche and through other people's psyches, and there's going to be sharing, you kind of want it to be a closed space. You know, bonding in that case really matters. And seeing the same faces week after week and seeing facial expressions can really matter. And it can be on Zoom, it can be in person, but you know, I've seen some that are sort of like a, you know, drop-in version, or, you know, there's so many people that there's no room to actually form connections. And I think especially in this work, when we're going to do it with other people, we need those connections for it to feel safe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, you guys, we have to leave it there tonight. I'm sorry. I will have, you can put, you know, some of your questions in chat, or you can definitely directly message Jennifer. It's her last name's Jennifer Reddy, and she is, you can find her here on Circles. You can private message her. I'm sure she has her group chat. Um,
Yep. And I
but I
just put
do
my
want to
email in
thank
the
you,
chat.
Jen. Yes, thank you for that. And any social media or anything that you have, I just want to thank you for, you know, sharing your gift with us. It's so interesting. It's fascinating work. I encourage you guys to, you know, give it some thought. Definitely connect with Jennifer if you have more questions. I also want to thank all of you for your gift of time. Um, I miss seeing so many of you. I just, this is really kind of a fun space. I think that we're going to create. And of course, me, it's going to be formal and we're going to have conversations. So we'll be back next Monday night. I'm planning on doing this again, same time, same place. I don't know who we're going to have on as our guest, but Jen, I'm super honored that you are our first guest for this, you know, for this tonight. So. And I just want to thank all of you for being super supportive and asking questions and being part of the conversation. And you know, I'm sending you all my love, light, big hugs to all of you. And some of you, I'll see you tomorrow night. Jen, when's your next class?
My next one is Wednesday. I've got a divorce and separation group. So
Okay. All
Yeah.
right, so pop in, if that's something that you're going through, you guys, that you can relate to. I'll be doing, I believe, a narcissistic group. I think it's tomorrow night. So I still have I have a new job, you guys. So I'm trying to like juggle all these things. So I'm glad to be back doing this. So I sending you big hugs tonight. Get some sleep, have some peace, and Jen and I will see you in our rooms later this week. Okay?
Yes. And thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Oh my God, thank you. It was. I love the conversation. You're very good at this. So
Likewise.
thanks, Jen. I appreciate it so much. Good night, you guys.